beautiful people. My name is Kristen. Welcome to Vlogmas book reviews. These will be the book reviews for nonfiction November, and now we're in December holidays, but we are not to discount the fun that was had during nonfiction November. I personally adore reading nonfiction. I know it's kind of intimidating or feels like school to a lot of people, so hopefully you'll bear with me and maybe give some of what I say a chance and discover that you want to pick up another nonfiction. And I also find that's really fun to read like a fiction book that kind of corresponds to a nonfiction, either about the author or about the subject matter. So this month, I always like to read a classic, and I thought that this was a nonfiction book about the Iliad that my friend Monica over at Cranky Grandma had recommended to me, Black Ships Before Troy, because I thought it was a commentary about the Iliad, but actually it's just a retelling of the Iliad, which really makes it more a fiction book, right? But it's really, really great, and I totally understand why she recommended it and why she would use this in school and classes around learning about the Iliad. And I appreciated it kind of was a little bit simpler language than reading the Iliad, and I found it to be less graphic, and there was a lot more, I felt anyway, that it was a lot more telling the story of what was happening on the earth as opposed to intermingled so much with the play of the gods and how they were interacting. I could be off. Monica, I'm sure, can leave a nice comment in the bottom and let us know some of her thoughts or comments about it. But it was very enjoyable. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I really, really enjoyed the retelling of it. And at first I kind of braced myself for all the war, right? It's a war story. You've got the Trojan horse and all that kind of stuff going on, right? But it was brilliant, and I like it, and I would recommend it, especially if you are interested in the Iliad. This would be a good one to partner up with it. And then I'm going to go ahead and share the other book that I thought was nonfiction, but turned out, I think, to be fiction more or less, and that's The Curse of the Boyfriend Sweater. This author, Patricia and Adam Scribner, they are actually the ones who kind of own like a bookstore knitting club area, but it's told not of their life, which would make it nonfiction, but was told about their customer or somebody else in the club, like from their perspective. So I'm kind of on the fence. That seems kind of a biography, if you will, or somebody else's is an author writing for the memoir. So I think it might be classified as nonfiction, but it really reads like fiction. It's a story about a girl who is a knitter, obviously, and there's actually patterns in here. Like, she talks about what she's making, and then at the end of the chapter there'll actually be a pattern, so if you are a knitter you can actually make what she makes. And she just kind of shares her story about moving, about finding new friends, about just kind of that young adult coming of age kind of stuff that I really do appreciate. So I'm not sure how much of it is straight truth since it's somebody writing about somebody else, but it's definitely based on a true story and reads like a very warm, cozy, curl up with your girlfriend kind of chat about real people that you know kind of thing. And if you have interest in creative clubs, it doesn't have to necessarily, I think, be knitting, but those kind of things where maybe they scrapbook together. If you like that kind of culture, that would be a pretty easy, fun read. Then I picked up one of my Dollar Tree books, My Side of the Street. This is a book that is about Wall Street, and I thought I was going to learn a little bit more about Wall Street and what it was actually like to work on it, which I did learn some, but it was really a memoir of this young man, Jason DeSena Trennert, who it's basically his biography and his memoirs about struggling, about getting his schooling, about breaking in, about knowing how to navigate, even how to discern restaurants, and what was the culture of where you were hanging out eating food, and that mattered. And so it was good. It was one of those books where I'm reading it and my husband would go like, "Oh, how's your book?" And I'd be like, "Oh, it's good." And he goes, "Oh, it's just a 3-star." And that's probably, it was good. I'm not sorry I read it. I did learn some. I think it was, again, just not quite what I was expecting going into it, and that sometimes is a struggle, right? Then I picked up William Service's Owl, and this was based on a recommendation that I heard from a book olive, who's one of my favorite booktubers who talks about nonfiction. And it is basically a diary about a person who had an owl as a pet. And it's short, so I don't want to give away a lot of the plot, but it is just told very passionately and dramatically and has some humor, as anybody who's ever had pets knows. And then you have a wild animal that is becoming not tame, but domesticated in many ways, and has its own personality and its own little quirks, and you learn some facts about owls. And I found it very, very enjoyable, and the ending is very surprising. And if you're at all interested in owls or exotic pets, or people who have those kind of experiences, it's a quick, easy read. Then I also picked up The Yellow House by Sarah Broom. This was last year's National Book Award winner. I think it was 2019's. And yes, 2019. Didn't want to misquote. And so this is a beautiful story about a woman documenting her childhood in New Orleans, and specifically kind of centers it around the story of her house, but it's much, much larger than that. It's her family members, her community, what it is like going through Katrina and the major hurricane is all in here. Also, just about the racial tensions, about some of the political things, about the tourism and the attitudes towards New Orleans and the French Quarter. Just very easy to read in the sense of your understanding and you're connecting to characters and your heart really goes into it. But difficult to read in the sense that, you struggle with some of these issues, with some of these zonings, with some of these people who are taking advantage of the situation, all those kind of good things. So it was also a book read that was going on with several people in YouTube, and I thought the discussions were going to be based off of YouTube originally, which is why I ordered the book and wanted to be part of that. But then most of the discussion was on Twitter. I don't tweet, but I'm sure it was an awesome discussion on Twitter. So I liked the book, and I'm not sorry I read it. Then my prediction of what I was going to most enjoy was The Big Thirst. This is a nonfiction look at water, about how we use water, what are the economics of water, looking at specific crises that have happened as a result of water, lack of water, transporting water, who has the rights to rivers or wells, or you take so much of it for granted, right? And so I just thought that this did deliver in being easy to understand, bringing up issues that maybe I hadn't thought about. There were some chapters, because they were often on so many specific things, some were of course more appealing and more interesting than others. I think it would be okay if you didn't have a deep interest, if you just kind of picked and choose around and learn a little bit. And I really, really found myself, after I read this, making sure I didn't waste my own water use. I was more mindful about the taps and laundry and dishwasher and just all those kind of things. It just makes you appreciate and be mindful of the blessings that we have in having access to water, and recognizing that not everybody does. And then it got even better. So those, I'm kind of showing you almost in the order that I read them. I picked up the Bob Barker's this is his autobiography that he wrote, his kind of memoirs, and had some help editing it, but it's basically like Bob Barker is talking to you. And if you don't know who this is, you should stop and Google real quick. He was a talk show host for Truth and Consequences, and then for 35 years Price is Right, and just had a massive following, just so personable, just such a loving man. He's still, of course, alive and existing and doing beautiful things still. It's just he's not doing The Price is Right anymore. But what's funny is, while I was reading this is when I got a new to me car, and so the whole time, anytime anything came up with my car, I'd just be like, do 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 do. And I would just have this in my head, y'all. I was just getting a new car. So I grew up with this as an important part of my kind of background and culture. So I particularly loved hearing all of the stories. He's just very funny, very down to earth, if you have any interest in the backstory of game shows or game show hosting, you should pick up the book. And it's at least a 4-star, probably a 5-star, but this next book is definitely a 5-star. This is my favorite nonfiction that I read, and I actually wasn't expecting it to be quite as good as it was. This is Losing My Voice to Find It. This is an autobiography by Mark Stuart, who's, I think, about 5 years maybe older than me, but he was part of a band named Audio Adrenaline. And if you read Taylor Jenkins Reid's The Daisy and the Six, that kind of backstory memoir of a rock group, which was fictitious, this is that kind of feel. He like talks about, the living in trailers and, breaking down on the road and being mistaken for the roadies when really they're the talent kind of thing. And just, it is a Christian faith-based band, and so it went along a lot of those lines with trying to have that age where they were trying to break out of just being Christian music to actually being played on main radio stations and all that kind of stuff. And back when they were started, their first really big breakthrough hit was 93, and I started youth ministry in 93, so I went to multiple shows. And this book, as I'm sitting on the couch, I'm like talking to it the whole time I'm like, yes, I forgot about that. Oh, that is such a good point. I totally remember that. I thought that too. Thank you for verifying what I thought back in the mid-90s. So, and I even at one concert got to go backstage as a youth leader with the other leaders, and we all prayed with Newsboys and Audio Adrenaline, and we were praying for Mark's voice because he at that point was having trouble with it. And I don't know exactly in the sequence of events when we were there, but I was watching this band as he was losing his voice, and he actually had a disease that took a long time for them to even figure out what was wrong with him, and he's the lead singer. And that's a problem. I mean, it'd be a problem for anybody to be losing their voice and not being able to talk. Anybody who's had laryngitis understands. But just the beautiful lessons then that God uses to change his life and to use him despite kind of losing your identity, right? It's that story of wrestling with who we are at the root. And just love it. Always loved this, and I really appreciated it. I felt like I was back reading Daisy Jones and the Six, but with my own life. Back to reality. So I really appreciated that. And then I know I said last month that on my birthday I was going to pick up the last in my Mistborn series, which I did. But I got so busy that last week in November with Thanksgiving, and work picked up, and then we wanted to decorate the house and we had all this stuff to do. And so I started it, Brandon Sanderson, Heroes of Ages, but I'm only halfway, y'all. But I love it. I'm just going to tell you, it's going to be a 5-star unless they just really, really mess up the ending. But I'm enjoying it. Look for it in my December reviews. Those are the books that I read in the month of November. It was a fantastic reading month. I just hope that you are inspired to pick up a little nonfiction, learn something about the world, whatever it is, whether it's a person, a place, or a thing. It's just always fun. We're never too old to learn. So if you have a favorite nonfiction, would you leave that in the comments below? Because I'm always looking to restock. My sister sent me a birthday gift for my birthday. That's a nonfiction story that was a true story about the earthquake in Anchorage, Alaska, which we lived there in the 80s. So that's not when the earthquake happened, though. It was way before that. But sounds that kind of story. Oh, y'all. Thank you for journeying along. Come along and see more. Talk to y'all soon. Take care.